Hello, everyone. Please make your way to the main room for those who can hear us outside. Welcome and welcome to Privacy Camp 2023. Yay! This is the 11th edition, and I'm really glad to see you in person again after 2 years of editions online. But we're also really pleased to make the content of today available online for those who are watching us. So it's a double event, and we're really happy about that. I'm Claire Fernandez. I'm the Executive Director of EDRI, European Digital Rights. EDRI is one of the co-organizers of Privacy Camp, together with the Free Universiteit Brussels, the Law, Science, Technology and Society Research Group, Privacy Salon, the Institute of European Studies at the University of Saint Louis. So thank you to our partners. I will just make a few announcements now about Privacy Camp, about the content of today's discussions, then acknowledging the people who are behind the event, and then some few logistical announcements. So for those of you who don't know what Privacy Camp is, this is the Brussels activist conference gathering civil society, academia, industry and decision makers, including EU officials, to strategize and learn about human rights and privacy in the digital age. Privacy Camp is meant to be a free, accessible conference pre-CPDP. Unfortunately, now since the pandemic, CPDP has been moved to May, but we hope that in the future we manage to gather the two events again together. But as technology is becoming a more and more important part of our lives, and that our relations to technology has evolved, so has Privacy Camp. So I'm really pleased to see old friends as well as newcomers, people from human rights organizations, from social justice and climate justice groups as well. So just could I have a quick show of hands as to who is attending Privacy Camp for the first time? Yeah, quite a few new people. And how about those who've attended already Privacy Camps, online or? All right. Okay, thank you. That's quite interesting to see as well the evolution of this beautiful conference. Today's topic is a reflection of the gloominess of the storm of crises that we are facing on so many fronts. The war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, the climate crisis, but also the rise of the far right. So we wanted to explore today how we think about technology in this context. Is technology fostering, amplifying these crises? Should we rethink our relation to internet and access to internet as a common good? And these are some questions that we hope this community can continue to address together. We hope this community can continue to question the power abuses, the exploitation, the oppressions that are at the core of this crisis. And that collectively we can also imagine technology that works for all and reclaim our rights, our democracy and our planet. So I really look forward to some very interesting conversations, whether on the intersection of digital rights and the climate crisis, whether rethinking internet platforms, surveillance technology and how it impacts people on the move, but also police surveillance and thinking about abolitionist frameworks. So I really hope you enjoy today's content. I wanted to acknowledge the people who are behind and the organization who are behind this event. First of all, our general partner for the 6th consecutive year, the European Data Protection Supervisor, who will join later, I think. So thank you very much to Wojciech Wiewiorowski and his team for trusting us with this event, for hosting their civil society summit within Privacy Camp. So really much looking forward to a discussion on spyware and state hacking after lunch. But Privacy Camp also exists thanks to the supports of and the many donors to EDRI. So individual donation also really make a difference, and I invite you, if you can, to also contribute today so we can continue delivering a free conference. This particular edition of Privacy Camp is also made possible thanks to the support of the Climate Justice and Digital Rights Coalition of Funders, NordVPN, Epic, Vivaldi, Quant, the Mysterium Network, and the Tech Hive Advisory. So thank you very much to our sponsor. I wanted to already have a round of applause for the Content Committee. I don't know if they are all here. I know Rocco isn't yet, unfortunately. But we wanted to thank the Content Committee for reviewing your very interesting sessions. So Andrea Bellu from EDRI, who is there. Gloria Gonzalez from the VUB. And Rocco Bellanova from the University of St. Louis. Thank you very much as well to our Guillermo Perez from EDRI and Angie Noni, who have put together this event, and it's a lot of work. So I want to appreciate them. And the whole EDRI team for leading sessions and organizing today's event. So speaking of organization, some few logistical announcements before we can start. You would have seen that there are 3 rooms. This one, the Salle des Arches and the Boudoir. You will follow the sign there. It's on the ground floor. And those 2 rooms are streamed. And the salon is just below us, is the workshop room. And this one is not streamed. It's meant to be an interactive session. The opening is just now, and the closing will also happen here. So please don't forget to come back at the end if you're still here. Each session will have an EDRI colleague. So they will be here to liaise with the tech people. And if you have any question, don't hesitate to approach them. They have EDRI t-shirts or other t-shirts, which I leave you discover. There will be limited spaces for workshops. So yeah, just to remember that if you really want to attend the workshops, to make your way there as soon as possible. If you are taking pictures, remember to only take pictures of the people with the green lanyard and not people with the red ones. If you have accessibility needs throughout the day, please contact Guillermo Perez from the EDRI team. And that's it. We're gonna start now. And run until approximately 11, where we have the coffee break. Then there are other rounds of sessions for about an hour and 20 minutes, and then lunch. Lunch will be in the foyer where you just had coffee. And after lunch, we have 2 rounds of sessions again, and we will finish here at 5. So I really hope you enjoyed today. You enjoyed the rich content. If you are online, that you can really listen in and follow all of our conversations. And if you are here, that you also enjoy the breaks. We're meeting people again in person and talking. So announcing that here just right now will be the discussion on reinventing platforms. That will be led by Valentina Pavel. We have the rise of border tech, so AI and migration in the boudoir, and the workshop on Europol in the salon. So we will have people introducing these sessions in the respective rooms. Thank you very much. I hope you really enjoyed today.
Welcome to the session on reimagining platform ecosystems. This session will be a hybrid session and will be moderated by Valentina Pavel. She's a legal researcher at Ada Lovelace Institute, and I immediately give you the floor.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you here. Thanks for choosing this session. We're going to talk about reimagining platform ecosystems. I have some little surprises in for you today, but let's get started on some context and housekeeping and logistics first. I'm a legal researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute. We are an independent research institute based in London and in Brussels. And our mission is to ensure that data and AI work for people and society. And in November, we published a report called Rethinking Data and Rebalancing Digital Power that looks at 4 interventions across infrastructure, institutions, governance, and public participation. That can help us think more ambitiously about our digital ecosystem and transform how platforms work towards the needs of people and society instead of them serving corporate agendas. And one of these interventions is interoperability as a way to transform how platforms work. And today it's very good to open this discussion together with you and our panelists and think more critically about what would a new vision for platforms look like, and what would it mean for online platforms to work for us? What would we like to see when it comes to digital systems? And one of the ways we can think more critically about this is to introduce interoperability mandates that can introduce a higher degree of modularity and customization in platforms, for example, replacing different third-party algorithms. But we're going to delve more into that in a second. In terms of housekeeping, as you know, this session is being recorded and streamed. We have a hybrid panel, and this is my first hybrid panel, so I'm counting on your tolerance if there are technical glitches, and I want your support in case things get sidetracked a little bit. So we have 2 of our speakers in the room, 2 of our speakers online. But I know there's also very great expertise in the room, and I'd like to invite your questions and comments very early in the discussion. If you're on social media, please tweet with the hashtag PrivacyCamp23 and hashtag RethinkingData. And if you have questions, please do use these hashtags. I'm gonna ask my colleague Connor, but maybe he's not yet in the room, to help me monitor social media. But if not, I'll find another volunteer. And I do have one provocation for you. We're in January, and January usually is the time when we look forward, when we make predictions, when we think about the future. So just as a way to warm up those hashtags, I'd like to invite you to type in your predictions for 2023 in terms of where do you see platforms this year, given the fact that the DMA and the DSA are going to come into application. And where would you like them to be in 5-10 years from now? What changes would you like to see? So as you're typing in your answers, I'm going to introduce our panelists and then ask them to also share their predictions and their wishes and hopes for digital platforms. So we have Ian Brown, computer scientist and internet regulation expert with us in the room. We have Vittorio Bertola, head of policy and innovation and at OpenXNet. We have Chantal Joris, legal officer at Article 19, and Jon von Trechner, CEO and founder at Vivaldi. And I'm extremely grateful to have you all here, especially because some of you are with big time zone differences behind of us. So I'm really grateful to all of you. And just to up the games in terms of using those hashtags and you posting on social media, preferably on Mastodon, You can tag me, Edri, and Ada Lovelace on Mastodon. You'll find us very easily. Or on Twitter. Twitter is still a thing, unfortunately, but we'll accept. And I have some little incentives for you to do those tweets. So this is an Ada Lovelace mug, and it says, what would Ada say? So what would Ada say about platform regulation this year and in 5 years from now? And the three most interesting predictions are going to win 3 mugs, and I need a judge for that. Does anybody want to volunteer to be a judge and monitor Mastodon and Twitter to offer these presents? Because I don't want to be a judge. I did study law, but yeah, I'm more of an activist, to be honest. I'm going to volunteer you if you're not going to raise your hand. And I'm going to volunteer the person who has their phone ringing, because obviously, obviously they are very well connected to social media. So you're going to decide who gets the 3 coffee mugs. Okay, so please do type in your answers. You have until the end of the session to that. We'll announce the winners at the end. And now, Ian, and would you like to share with us what's your vision for platform ecosystems? Where do you think interoperability fits in, and what would be some of the advantages and disadvantages that you see?
With your sort of theme of revolutionary change, which I like, because I spend most of my time thinking about incremental change, I think we're already seeing a lot of interesting incremental change, and we'll hopefully get a lot more of it via interoperability mandates in the DMA next year. I mean, it comes into force. I mean, it's in force, but the gatekeepers will be designated in the summer. I think it's September the Commission has to do that by, and then those gatekeepers will have to follow the obligations in the DMA by next March 2024, and then there's an even further stage with the interoperability obligation. Other companies that want to connect to it will almost certainly be WhatsApp and iMessage, and perhaps some of the other big messaging platforms have to request it, and then the gatekeepers have 3 months. So I hope later next year, a very concrete hope, I can delete WhatsApp finally. I deleted Facebook years and years ago and never regretted that, but of course, one of the arguments for an interoperability obligation is it's very hard if all your friends and family and colleagues and school kids, teachers and community groups and so on have lots of discussions on one platform, which really you need to be on. You know, if you want to have a social life, if you want to know when your kid's school is closed tomorrow because of snow, a whole variety of reasons. So that's my very concrete hope. I hope we'll see a lot more innovation in platform businesses generally. And again, other bits of the DMA have, you know, it's not just the messaging interoperability obligation, which got a lot of the media coverage. There's stuff relating to operating systems, app stores, search engines, and so on. And I hope that will make, you know, we have examples like DuckDuckGo and Signal, more privacy-focused platforms. They still have a very small market share overall. And I hope the DMA will help them to significantly increase in quality and user numbers. So that's the evolution. On the revolution side, one thing I really liked in the report that Valentina and colleagues did with Ada last year was platforms tend to be monolithic today. Sometimes they'll let you plug in components, as Facebook and as Twitter do, that serve the interests of those platforms. But of course, there's always the risk, as we just saw with Twitter last week. I mean, here's another quick question. Who was using Tweetbot or Twitterific or one of the third-party clients to read Twitter rather than Twitter's own platform? And sadly, we no longer are, because Elon Musk decided last week he was no longer going to allow alternative Twitter clients to connect to connect to Twitter. So we're all thrown back onto the main Twitter platform. That's the risk of interoperability of complementary services if the platform itself always gets to decide, well, which of these services do I want to allow to connect or not? Of course, they're not going to allow services to connect that they think threaten their business. That's what Musk has said, and that's where I think regulation is important. But imagine platforms which went much further than that, which technically speaking, it would be more complex, but it would be possible that you could decompose platforms into lots of different bits of functionality and plug in alternative stuff of your choice. The one which Article 19, which I'll leave Chantal to talk about, has been working on, I think is a really interesting idea of changing the recommendation and curation algorithms in social media platforms. But you could imagine all sorts of other ways to give people a lot more choice about how platforms worked, to give opportunities to SMEs to come up with new innovative functionality that a big platform might not think was so interesting. So I'm still as passionate about interoperability as I was when I started researching it in 2008. I've been pushing for it ever since, and it's wonderful. It's in the DMA, and I hope it will go a lot further.
Thank you, Ian. Ian has a very great contribution in our Rethinking Data and Rebalancing Digital Power report, so I do recommend you read that, because it goes into the practical implementations of interoperability mandates. But Chantal, I also want to come to you and ask you to share us your vision for platforms, and yeah, what are your predictions? What's coming up next?
Thank you, Valentina, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So I work for Article 19, and we're an international freedom of expression organization. So that is basically the lens through which we view interoperability and platforms more generally. First of all, I do agree basically with all the excellent points that were made by Ian. And from a freedom of expression perspective, more specifically, of course, we would wish the internet was this open space for debate, exchange of ideas, where users can connect and express themselves freely. And of course, we understand as well that today this really is not the case. It might seem unrestricted, but a handful of dominant companies and platforms really have a lot of power over the internet at the infrastructure level, but also when it comes more specifically to like social media companies. And they have an enormous amount of power over the information we get to access and the ways we can express ourselves. And so our vision really is, also we know as well that the business models that have been adopted by many of the dominant players are not exactly conducive to a healthy debate, the way the recommender systems work, and I will talk about that aspect in a bit later on. But the way these recommender systems work, they tend to amplify the content that tends to engage users more, which leads to dissemination and amplification of harmful content, of disinformation, etc., etc. So in that sense, we think that our vision is basically that the internet goes back, and these private companies, as you mentioned at the start, Valentina, also that they work again for users and enabling users to again express themselves and participate in public debate. And we think that the solutions generally that we've proposed at Article 19 are twofold. One is, of course, the sort of more traditional focus on human rights, due diligence, transparency of platforms, procedural rights, etc., which are more aspects that we've talked about in the context of the DSA, the Digital Services Act. And then as well, we think that the companies which are gatekeepers, also in the sense of our enjoyment of human rights, that their market power needs to be curbed, because otherwise there will not be enough incentive for new players to come in and for users to make a choice which service they want to use without, as Ian mentioned, losing all their contacts, because, for instance, they want to leave Facebook because they think their respect for privacy, it doesn't live up to the standards. Today, if I want to make a choice to leave Facebook, I lose all my contacts, essentially, right? So we do think it can bring in new players that may have an incentive to focus more on reputational risk around human rights, or how they respect the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression. So also in terms of prediction, we now obviously have the DSA and the DMA. Both of them we think are a step in the right direction. They might not have been as ambitious in certain way as we would have wanted them to see, but for sure the fact that interoperability now has become part of the DMA, and that these human rights considerations have become part of the discussion, of the competition discussion and the discussions in the DMA, are positive. Also when it comes, I mean, we really, as a matter of principle or generally, we basically only see upsides from introducing more and more interoperability. Of course, if this is introduced, it needs to come with relevant protections to privacy, security, etc., etc. But we don't see any downside per se of making the platforms as interoperable as possible.
Thank you very much, Chantal. That was excellent. Jan, can I turn next to you?
Sure. So I think where I'm coming from is a little bit of a different place. I've been on the internet for a really long time, since 1992, building 2 browser companies, now on my second one. And I'm kind of pissed off about the idea that companies are getting away with basically being spyware and collecting information about what we are doing. And in my humble opinion, the first step that we need to go to is to basically ban this, this level of collection of data shouldn't be allowed. And I'm not saying you can't use any data whatsoever, but I do think it's really important that we stop this misuse of data, the profiling of users, and the utilizing of that profiling to place content. So instead of giving people a choice of algorithms to show content, I want to basically ban this way of selecting content. And in particular ban the profiling. I think the damage to society is significant, and I don't really think, technically speaking, there is a simple way to do this. I mean, reading the report, there's a lot of details in your report about all the things that need to be done to deal with the fact that you have data. In my humble opinion, it's a lot simpler to just take data out of the equation. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not excited about kind of new ways of doing things, and I hope everyone will be moving over to the more open standards. There's a new open standard with ActivityPub, which enables you to write new technical solutions which are distributed. But just to be clear, solutions like Mastodon and the like that are built on top of that, data is not part of the equation there. So the idea of forcing data to be part of that equation, I think, is not a good thing. You still have the ability to move from one platform to another. And I think that's a really good thing. And I think it's good that that's being a focus, that you're able to move between platforms. I'm just afraid of cementing the rights of big tech to be collecting our data, and that we just normalize it instead of saying it's wrong, that we say, okay, we have to live with it. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. I think we are seeing the consequences of what they've been doing. I think they should never have been allowed to do that in the first place. I think they should have had the ethics to stop doing it as soon as they understood that what they were doing was wrong. And I think, obviously, I think all of them realized that. So we need to change there. And I think fixing the kind of issues that we have with data collection and privacy and the like, it needs to be done that way. So from the one side, basically banning the use of profiling and data for the display of data and ads and the like. And on the other hand, I think anyone should be embracing those new standards, because suddenly we actually have something that's standardized, which is where we have the W3C behind it. So the World Wide Web Consortium, which is kind of the guys that gave us the web, obviously starting with Tim Berners-Lee. That's what we should be supporting. That should we, and that's, by the way, that we as the first browser company and others coming after us have jumped in and are putting up our own servers, and again trying to explain how all of this work. All the institutions, companies, foundations, and the like should be putting up their own servers and engaging in that. And I think there's an opportunity now, in particular with the focus of the misuse and the focus of what's happening on Twitter, for this to take off. And I think we all should be supporting that. And that's actually maybe one of the faster ways to see a change.
Thank you very much for bringing those concerns in. And Vittorio, let us know if there's any way we can address some of the points that Jon mentioned, and if interoperability does help or does more harm with that.
Yeah, no, of course, interoperability helps. So, I mean, I'd start from the question of what are the platforms going to do tomorrow? And I think they're going to do the same thing that they've been trying to do every day, so they conquer the world. So this is really a mission for conquering the entire knowledge of the world and closing it down and using it to build more walled gardens. And so this is the stake. I mean, many people, especially outside of technology, do not really understand what's at stake. So now this is endangering really the democracy and the basics of our society. And so they are going to build more walled gardens and try to resist opening up these ones. They will resist the implementation of the DMA. They will resist the additional laws. They will send lobbyists everywhere to all the capitals and all the offices here. And they will try to basically make all this talk of digital sovereignty, sovereign cloud moot by just giving very good offers to all public administrations in Europe so that they use Office 365 or Google Suite or whatever. So they have tactics that are both based on the legal side, but also on the business side, and also on the technical side. Usually they try to use the global standardization bodies to push certain technologies that suit their way. And I have a word of caution about encryption, which is good, and we all like it, and we've been pushing for it. But now they're trying to build this kind of encrypted overlay network so that you have a phone on you or something, you have a vocal assistant in your home, and this just opens up an encrypted channel to a server in the US and escapes any European law and any control. You don't even know which data are being sent from your home to the servers somewhere in the cloud. So they are using encryption to disempower the users. So so in the end, the point is rather what's the alternative? So interoperability is important because it is one of the key elements of any alternative that we want to build, to oppose this. Actually, it was the original principle of the internet. So if you look at how the internet was designed in the last century now, I mean, until the end of the 20th century, it was based on interoperability, and the services that came out of that phase, like email or the web, were interoperable services, and actually are still today. I mean, in a way, even if they're trying to be dominated by the usual suspects, they're still the most open ones, the ones in which you can actually choose different providers, and you can actually use third-party applications to send messages or connect to web pages all over the world without having to go through the platform. And so we are not really trying to propose anything new with interoperability. It's really being just keeping the promise of the internet, which was that even if you were not in California, not in Europe, not in China, but somewhere in Latin America or in Africa or in Vietnam, you could just download the specifications and learn how to write the code and build something that would work all over the internet without having to ask for permission to anyone, to any government, but also to any company. So the sad thing that we are now in the middle of is that we discovered that we defended the global, borderless, unregulated nature of the internet from governmental intervention, and then we discovered that if you go too far in that direction, there are no laws, and there will be a few private companies that will just take over the internet and close it down. So we don't want the governments to close down the internet, but we also don't want big global companies to close down the internet. We have to find the good middle ground. And I think this will be the discussion for the next few years. Where do you set this middle ground so that you have some laws, some regulation, but not too much that goes in the opposite direction?
Thank you, Victorio. So you heard a range of perspectives. So I want to incentivize you bringing in the first question to the panelists with giving you an ADA sticker. So whoever raises their hand first are going to receive stickers. And if you're not ready for that yet, I do have a set of questions for all our panelists. For Ian, if we think from a competition perspective, how can we enable this new type of infrastructure with interoperability and change and rebalance market dynamics? What would this mean for users? How would it look like in its most desirable form? And I also want you to touch on this point about something that was mentioned in the European Data Protection Supervisor's opinion, which said that the provisions on interoperability in the Digital Markets Act actually have the potential to advance GDPR goals. And we've also heard Jon being less optimistic about privacy and data protection. So how do we put everything in balance, and how do we negotiate this?
In terms of what legal provisions, legal obligations for interoperability look like, we've got a number of examples, concrete examples now. We have the DMA in its final form. There was a lot of negotiation that led to the exact language about messaging interoperability obligations. It's a real shame that the European Parliament's version of the DMA, which also had a social media interoperability obligation, didn't get past the European Council, so that's not in the final version, but I think there are still ways over time that might be addressed. But there's legislation in the US Congress that would impose very similar obligations. If you want to look it up, it's called the Access Act. It obviously did not pass yet. Whether the Democrat, now that the Republicans are in charge of the House of Representatives, I imagine there won't be a lot of change for the next couple of years, but we will see after that. Actually, China has done a lot on interoperability obligations. I'm sure you're aware that we have GAFAM dominating the world largely outside China. Inside China, there are Chinese equivalents, massive platforms that even more to an extent than GAFAM do elsewhere, like Alibaba and Tencent, and the Chinese government is first of all put pressure on those companies to open up their services to a larger degree than they had before. But China is also changing its anti-monopoly law and putting new consumer protection provisions in place to require interoperability. So in terms of what does the law look like to require interoperability, we've got a number of examples. In terms of what the European Data Protection Supervisor's opinion has said, I mean, that's always been one of my motivations as well in advocating for interoperability obligations, because the hope is that, and by the way, just to make clear, I'm not saying this can replace the GDPR and strong privacy laws. It can complement it, I think. If you give people more choice and people care about privacy, which, as we know from lots of surveys over the years, many people do. If you give them the ability to pick Signal, not WhatsApp, to pick DuckDuckGo, not Google, privacy-focused services, freedom of expression-focused services, as Chantal was talking about, that's one way to advance rights. I'm personally not excited by interoperability because of commercial factors. It's always been that I've found most interesting, and that is what the EDPS said in their opinion. I agree with it. There was some criticism last year when the EU institutions announced they had reached political agreement on the DMA, including interoperability. They weren't clear about exactly what they meant, which I think was a mistake, because then there was a lot of speculation online about exactly what does this mean, and actually will it damage privacy and security. I don't think it does. I think the DMA has got it right in the way it sets out very detailed provisions in Article 7 on those on those aspects. But I think that, and this is something I've heard Vittorio talk about as well and very much agree with you, yes, keep thinking about the impacts on privacy of data flowing between organizations with explicit user consent, but also keep in mind this other factor. Well, if you're giving people more genuine choice over the services they use, that means you're enabling people that value privacy to actually switch service and hopefully generate more market pressure alongside strong GDPR enforcement to do that.
Thank you, Ian. And Chantal, I'm going to turn to you first. If we go beyond the Digital Markets Act and we think about interoperability measures that would allow us, for example, to replace different core functionalities like news feeds, content moderation, what would be the implications from a freedom of expression point of view? Because on the one hand side, we can say that this offers more choice and it's better for the individual user, but at the same time, we also have concerns when it comes to entrenching the position of large platforms as indispensable infrastructure. So where do we situate this from your point of view?
Yes. So first of all, I need to give a quick shout out to my colleague Isa, who is the competition expert in our team, and has been working a lot on this, on our policy on interoperability when it comes to these core functionalities of the platforms. So yeah, so for Article 19, we have been pushing as part of, again, our freedom of expression advocacy generally and on our work on platform regulation, that these core functionalities should be opened up. So we categorically think that this will be positive for freedom of expression. So because the vast majority, as we have it now, obviously the social media platforms that provide the hosting services also in the same bundle provide the curation services as well as the content moderation. Everything is done by the same player generally. And we do believe that if dominant platforms would have to allow for third parties to come in and, for instance, to provide alternative content curation to users, then these users could have, obviously, again, a more active choice in what sort of content they access, and in that sense, a much more active exercise of their right to information, right? And we do think it will be beneficial from a freedom of expression perspective in many ways. So I think if we give, so I agree with Jan on that point, if we give users the choice to, and level the playing field a little bit between the users and the companies, because the users can leave if they don't like what the companies have to offer, we can incentivize these private players to go in directions that regulators basically have failed to do. So, for instance, when it comes to the collection of vast amount of personal data, the profiling, and other harmful practices. So, where regulators have not managed to impose certain conditions that would be more beneficial for human rights, we think that perhaps through more user choice and through more empowerment of users, that can be forced in different ways upon companies. So on the one hand, we've talked a lot about how recommender systems, again, can have harmful effects, how they are designed many times, harmful effects on the public debate. If users are given a choice and if different companies have to compete to be able to provide these curation services to users, then it will incentivize them to provide better quality, right? And better quality can also mean, again, better respect for human rights, less privacy invasive ways of collecting data, profiling users, and for instance, access to a wider variety of sources. These are all things that we know that many users wish to have, but they don't really have viable alternatives at the minute. At the same time, we think it can be, so we see obviously around the world, many governments see a problem with the dominance of certain companies, and how they can promote and amplify harmful content. But their remedy has been to regulate them in a manner that restricts user speech and in fact gives them more control to check what users should say or should not say online. So we are categorically against such repressive regulatory solutions. And we do think that regulatory solutions based more on interoperability, open markets, etc., can provide maybe an alternative to more repressive answers that we've seen from government. Hopefully, basically have governments opt for these type of measures if they work and refrain from adopting more repressive answers to the same problem, basically. And so we think that this can work for content curation services, for content moderation services as well. Certain people might have different levels of tolerance, and which is fair enough. And so they might want to have a choice of what sort of content they get exposed to without that being imposed on all users in the same way. So again, we do think diversifying the environment, and also there are many ways, if we have new players coming in, there are also many ways these will be innovative new actors, which maybe we can't imagine right now as well. So we think there's just like a whole host of possibilities of how we will be able to interact online, engage online, participate in public discussions, etc. So we really think that that this will be fully positive, as I mentioned at the start. And to the point where you said that it might further consolidate power because they will be seen, certain companies will seen as providing the necessary infrastructures for new players to come in. I mean, the way it is now, they don't provide only the necessary infrastructure, they are the only alternative without any other option of any other player to use this infrastructure and their user base to provide a different recommender system, different content moderation tools. So, you know, the more we can also diversify on the infrastructure level, and maybe some player will come in that will become even more powerful outside the pure content curation service, the better. But we do think it will not consolidate further the power of the dominant platforms. It will definitely be a first step in the right direction.
Thank you, Chantal. Jan, if I can turn to you and ask you to maybe reflect on some of the points that were mentioned by Chantal and others, and ask you, how do you see interoperability potentially being exploited by large platforms, and what measures do we need to think about in order to avoid further dependencies on big tech? And I did hear your point loud and clear on banning ad tech and looking at the data level and trying to figure out measures for data collection. But it'd be great to hear your reflections.
Yeah, I think there's a number of points here, and I think, I mean, for me, it's obviously the elephant in the room is that dealing with data, and I think in a way we need to address that, and that needs to be a core thing. And I think everything else becomes a lot easier in other ways. But even when you have open systems, you still have problems, and I can tell you about that. Anyone that's, for example, trying to provide an email service, and we provide free email to our users as an example, you'll run into systems where the big players will actually block you. Now, they will block you for a reason, because you're actually having issues with spammers and the like. So spammers try to utilize the different platforms. But in the case of the big platforms, they'll just block you fully, right? So there's an interoperability thing, but then they have a reason to block you because there are spammers on your platform, so they block the whole platform that you have instead of blocking just the spammers. So there's things like that. Now, when it comes to consent, there's a lot of talk kind of that this is just a question of individual kind of decisions on what people want to do. But the reality, we know that, and we've seen that before, that consent doesn't work. Basically, people are not really actively given choice. they don't understand, obviously, kind of what they're consenting to. But also there's just a question to me, what kind of things are you supposed to be allowed to ask people for? And I just think that it's gone quite too far. And we've seen that with GDPR and the like, where, where we are seeing the pop-ups asking, can we utilize your data? And there's a huge difference between how the data might be used, but the dialogues may be very similar. So there's a problem there. I just don't think that it works to be asking users those questions at all. I think in reality, they find ways to get around making it a real question. And I also just think that people don't necessarily have the knowledge to understand what they're being asked. And they think about it from a personal point of view, and they think, hey, I don't really have too much to hide. And then they accept, okay, to get access to the platform, I'll just do accept it. So I think we need to change that. Now, as I said, I'm very excited about the new technical solutions, like with the ActivityPub and Mastodon and the like. And I would urge everyone to get onto those platforms, because I think that can provide a catalyst for change. And I think obviously the DMA and the Digital Services Act and the like, all of those can help with competition. And I think that's a positive thing. I'm seeing the Digital Markets Act as something that can make a significant difference. But we just have to remember, the big guys have a lot of different ways to create issues. They can create incompatibilities. And again, given that I've been doing this for a really long time, I can probably describe 100 different ways that they've made to get around issues where they block competition in one different way or another. So again, there's the concern that even if you can choose your own algorithm, but you end up choosing the default one. It's kind of like, any of you noticed with the Microsoft, they're not maybe getting there fully, but kind of if you try to download a different browser into the Windows operating system, how many different ways do they try to persuade you not to do that or block it? Or you can just do it like Apple does and not allow it in the first place, or with Windows 10s and you don't allow it either. So there's a lot of different ways to get around any kind of interoperability or choice mechanisms, which is why, for simplicity's sake, and not to have a situation where we put regulation in place and then kind of it doesn't really work, and then we need to do it again and again, and at the same time potentially cementing the position of the big guys, because we're seeing that, okay, they're in the position they are, so we can't do anything about it. So we kind of end up doing things around the edges. I think we have to go a lot further and a lot shorter in some ways, because it's a lot simpler what I'm proposing, which is kind of coming from the computer world. It's the KISS, keep it simple. And I think that's basically what we need. We need to see that there is clear regulation, what we can do. I think the interoperability aspects that we are seeing with technical solutions like Mastodon and the like is very exciting, because you can switch between servers and the like. But I also think it's not enough in itself. You also need to deal with the elephant in the room, which is the data collection. And I don't think we should mandate kind of data collection and kind of more people have access to it, because I don't really think that will solve solution. We need to deal with those things separately. If we deal with the data collection, ban it, the misuse of data, and at the same time we look at ways to be able to switch services and the like, I think then we are talking about solutions that will work.
Thank you, but I do have a follow-up question for both you and Vittorio, and basically everybody that's technical in the room. If we operate with open standards, doesn't that mean that when a new player introduces open standards that potentially perform better than existing, better than how current services are running, doesn't that create a sort of a race to the top in terms of new services replacing the old and bad ones, and users actually moving towards those services? Is this happening, Vittorio? Is this a myth, or
Well, in general, the creation of new standards takes quite some time. I mean, the technology around the standards and the protocols changes relatively slowly. What happens is that they evolve. And so this is why the interoperability clauses are designed so that you have a common layer of common functionalities, and then you have ways to extend them, which could actually be unilateral by specific services, and this could actually create this race to the top. But in general, what you do, I mean, by mandating people to talk to each other, is that you actually create competition. So, I mean, I'm clearly a business guy because I have a jacket, but I'm actually an engineer. And my employer actually is an open source software maker. We make some of the applications for email and DNS that are in any Linux distribution. And I'm making this point because I do want to stress that all this talk is not against the businesses, it's not destroying the economy. I was 2 months ago in a conference in Berlin organized by the Adenauer Foundation, and there were politicians by a certain German party saying that GDPR is the worst thing that ever happened to Europe because it's stifling business, and I raised my hand and said it's the exact opposite. I mean, for the European internet industry today, if there is one competitive advantage against the Americans, it's the GDPR. It's the fact that you can tell the people that if you store your data in Europe and you use our services, they will definitely be more private and less privacy intruding than the American or the Chinese ones. And so, so this is why I think that this is a step forward even for businesses. Because today, if you want to create, let's talk about instant messaging, since this is where the interoperability is first coming into deployment. So if today you want to create a new instant messaging app, well, good luck. I mean, yes, you can create it. Maybe it's much better than WhatsApp and whatever, but no one will use it because we already have like 10 different instant messaging apps and we don't want to install the 11th. And even if you do install the 11th, so you as the maker convince people to install the 11th, then there's no one they can talk with because all the users are on the other side. So if you change this so that all the apps can talk to each other, at least for the basic functionalities, what happens is that, I mean, the user can actually install this new app and immediately use it to talk with all their previous friends and contacts. And so there's actually some use for this app, and if the app is better, actually can start gaining market shares and become used. And maybe all the others will see you that you're using it, and they will move to that app as well. So this is creating opportunities for competition and for business. But at the same time, it's also giving users a choice, and this is very important. So if the user is dissatisfied with WhatsApp, they can actually move to something else without losing all their contacts and conversations and whatever. There was a study when a couple of years ago, WhatsApp changed their terms and conditions. There were people that really wanted to stop using WhatsApp because the new conditions were worse. And the survey said that over 100 people that tried, only 1% in the end managed to completely move away from WhatsApp and uninstall it. I mean, like 1/4 actually installed the new apps, but still kept WhatsApp for the old conversations. And most people just gave up and didn't change, even if they really did not want to use WhatsApp anymore. So this is actually the effect we're also giving for users. And there's more of that. I mean, why do we have to have 10 applications that do the same thing? I mean, the only difference is usually the color of the buttons. I mean, this is consuming resources. It does have an environmental impact through consuming your battery and whatever. I mean, we don't need to waste resources to have bigger phones because you need to keep 10 messaging apps operating at the same time. I don't know if, we should discuss also about the myth that big tech is pushing, that this is going to be against privacy and security, because, you have this very secure WhatsApp application that is not letting your data be accessed by anyone except Meta. But so if you bring other applications in the loop, there will be other companies that can spy upon you. And this is really not true. It's like for email. If you don't trust the applications, the system that the other person you want to talk with is using, just don't send communications. There are ways. But in the end, all the standards today are made so that, what happens with browsers? You have browsers, you have web servers, and they negotiate the good level of encryption, the best level of encryption that they can give you, and this is automatical, and you don't have to do anything, and it doesn't mean that all the traffic is not encrypted. So there are solutions for this as well.
Yeah, but just to complement, the question earlier, if we look today at instant messaging apps, they all run on the same encryption protocol, right? So Signal came in at one point with the Signal protocol, and then everybody adopted it. It was a pressure from the user side for them to adopt the protocol, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the Signal has a sort of ambiguous position on interoperability, but I understand them because they say, yes, in principle, we agree we would like to interoperate, but at the same time, we are worried that if we interoperate with other apps that are not as secure as we are, then our users might lose some security. But the point is that if you establish a standard for privacy and security that you have to meet to connect, then everybody will get at least that minimum level. So I mean, you can you can be ensured that will happen. And so of course there are also commercial positioning or market positioning by all the various apps. So if you have built all your credibility on saying, I mean, correctly, we are more secure and private than all the other apps, I mean, then you cannot admit that all the other apps will be using your same encryption. But at the same time, I think it's in the end, for users, it's an advantage to be able to choose because they will, I mean, if someone comes up with something better, you will just be able to switch finally to something that is more privacy friendly, even if just maybe because they have their servers in your country and not somewhere in the world in other places which have less privacy protection.
Thanks, Victoria. Oh yeah, great. I can share stickers now. Yay! Who was first? Sorry, I can't see very well because of the light, but we have a mic here, so let me pass this forward. Take stickers. Thank you. It's not on.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering, the part you mentioned about there being like a lots of different apps, a result of that is, for example, apps like if this, then that, that connect different apps. And they more like sort of arose from the idea of just being annoyed that sharing data between apps is difficult, but not really the idea of privacy. And a lot of people look at the operating system to fulfill that purpose. Like, why does if this and that exist? If Apple could, connect those apps in the OS. And I'm wondering how much of the discussion or the problem should be solved by the operating system of, yeah, basically that was it.
Is this a question for somebody in particular on the panel or whoever wants to take it?
Whoever wants to take it.
I could try. Yes, often you can solve some of these issues at the OS level. The DMA does include specific interoperability obligations for operating systems as well. So, for example, and this was one of the examples that Commissioner Vestager used when she launched the original proposal for the DMA. That if you have an iPhone, you'll know you can or Android, you can use it to pay at terminals with if you put your card details. On the iPhone, Apple has specific hardware in the phone to carry out that transaction, which Apple doesn't allow any of its competitors to access. So all other financial institutions that want to let their customers use Apple Pay have to go through Apple, basically have to go through Apple Pay. And the DMA says, no, when you're in a position like Apple where you control the hardware and the operating system, and you're doing things with it for using your own software, you will also have to allow your competitors. So I and most people are not using Apple's financial services. They've got a partnership with Goldman Sachs, but they're not a big bank, obviously, currently. I mean, they could be perhaps. But why can't I use my bank's app without having to go through Apple Pay? I mean, I'm generally an Apple fan. I like generally speaking their attitude to privacy, not so much their attitude to competition and interoperability. But yes, you can do some of this through OSs, through alternative clients. So I mean, Chantal and Isis, one of the things Article 19 was saying in the Digital Services Act, users of very large online platforms should explicitly have an option to use a different recommendation or curation algorithm on Facebook and so on. That's one way of achieving this. A parallel way is more along the lines that you're talking about. It's using alternative clients, like I mentioned earlier, Tweetbot or Twitterific and so on, to view your social media feed, because the client can apply the different algorithms to the prioritizing of the post and so on. So I think a lot of these mechanisms are complementary.
Yeah. Okay. Hi. Just I had a question on because you were talking about the Signal, and I think one of the things that I remember that the people from Signal were saying is that they were against the idea of decentralized servers because they thought that it was impossible to basically deploy the kind of security that they were providing, in that way. So something that I thought would be, if you can maybe open up a bit, like the difference between interoperability as we see it, decentralization, and federation, because I think that there are all these things that we get them bundled up a bit, or the fourth alternative, which I think is something that's been, the elephant in the room, which is like simply break them up, and just like go on a straight, like monopoly, just start breaking them and separate the vertical integration.
That's a great question. Any takers? Because I'm not going to nominate if not.
No, well, I agree. I think we actually have to have that discussion, and in part it is a philosophical discussion. So of course, if I just stay alone in my room, then no one will actually have a way to communicate with me, but that will be very secure and private. So there's, I'm not convinced that I mean, people that say that they are the only people that can provide a secure service, I tend to disagree. I mean, I think that there are good public practice for security, and if the standard is done good, that will apply to everyone. Then, I mean, of course, it's a matter of choice, but interoperability is what enables federation and decentralization. But again, users are not forced to take it. If you don't want to interact with anyone else, you just, I mean, you can have your own. But by the way, by having open standards, what you can do, you can have private deployments. So you can take let's say the global instant messaging standard, if that will ever happen, and then you can install your own server that you only use with your friends, and you are the only ones that can communicate through it. And I mean that happens with Matrix, for example, and it's another way if you want to have additional security.
How was that answer? Are you? Do you want some complimentary remarks from Ian or somebody else?
Just one very briefly, I would say, I mean, I absolutely agree with Vittorio. I greatly admire Signal, as an organization and as a product. They're not the only organization in the world that can run highly secure messaging servers, clearly. I don't have any particular problems with Signal's privacy policies as such. That's why I use them. But they are subject to US jurisdiction, which potentially puts all sorts of surveillance obligations on them. The product is designed in a way to minimize the data that Signal as an organization can find out about you. But it's not zero, and we may not know now, because the US government can place secret obligations on companies under US jurisdiction to share information with the US government. So I would like the choice with Signal, actually, to have my messages hosted in a European server, not in a US server.
Thank you.
There's the person online wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add from my side, if you don't mind, when it comes to the web and understanding kind of how the web works, I think it's a great example of how things work when you have underlying standards. I mean, in reality, you can, and technically speaking, you can connect any browser to any site on the internet. Now, obviously, from a competitive point of view, you will find that competitors try to block things, and particularly when they're in a position of power. So this is where the Digital Markets Act come in and the like. But technically speaking, if there's a will, there's a way to open up for interoperability in this way for messaging services. There's no question about that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. So Joris van Hoboken, I'm at the University of Amsterdam and the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. I have a, my question is for, first question is for Chantal. And basically, you know, like, could you say something about your experience with promoting, you know, like interoperability in the social media space, you know, in the policy arena? I have the sense that, like, we ran into pretty significant opposition from, let's say, the broader law enforcement community. And, you know, most of that opposition, I think, wasn't necessarily public, but, you know, it was of the form, like, we prefer actually just a bunch of centralized platforms because they're much more effective in establishing relationships with and making sure that certain kind of harmful stuff and illegal content is being addressed. And generally kind of is a better situation for law enforcement and government to have leverage over social media spaces. Of course, we also ran into that kind of being voiced quite publicly by Frances Haugen. You know, said like, oh, the interoperability is like the worst you can think about, you know, that's spreading the problems. And so it's like, that's quite a significant opposition that exists in the social media interoperability space. And I'm just curious where you feel that we landed, and now that the DSA has been concluded. And maybe then a question for the whole panel. You know, like, so one of the things about the interoperability, and let's say Article 7 of the DMA, which says the interoperability requirement or the possibility of interoperability for the messaging services, it takes actually a lot of work to do this in practice. You know, like, you need to work on, like, the implementation. It's really labor intensive, both on the industry and the service side, on the technical side, but also for policymakers. And I don't have the sense that it's a big priority for the European Commission. There's just an enormous task in starting to enforce the DMA, and I don't think this is very high on the list. But what are the ways in which this can be made into a higher priority for the Commission? What are your thoughts on, like, pushing the Commission and people here in Brussels to take this more seriously in the implementation?
I can, yeah, maybe start. Thanks for the question. It's a great question. So on the one hand, yes, as you say precisely, law enforcement is very keen on having to deal all around the world. So UK, Turkey, Tunisia, wherever, they are very keen of having to deal with only quite few players and being able, because that will facilitate them being able to control or have, as you say, direct relationships. And in that sense, and this is basically one of the reasons which confirms why we want more decentralization, because we do not want, because it is also one of the means to basically limit government control on user speech, because they will have many more actors that they will have to deal with. Same with the requirements to host data physically as well in the country. So we have definitely encountered opposition from law enforcement, of course, also from the biggest companies who are not particularly keen to get that competition. And also we need to clarify when it comes to sometimes the narrative is also a bit that we are inviting any sort of rogue actors to come in that might be even less human rights compliant in their policies and the way and their activities and the way they conduct their business than, say, Meta. But of course, and also maybe to respond a bit to Jan's point, we don't say interoperability is the only solution. It needs to go hand in hand, of course, with respect for human rights standards. The collection of data as is done today is a clear infringement of the right to privacy. So these are complementary measures. And in that sense, we do think that if the human rights standards are clear for the new players as well, and for the current ones, that again, this will be beneficial overall. And we do think that we have been able, particularly with the Digital Markets Act, as I mentioned at the start, to bring in this human rights component to the competition debate. So again, it didn't go as far as we wanted to, but we do see it very much as a start of a sort of anti-monopoly movement that is connected with a strong human rights movement, with civil society being at the table when it's about the enforcement of the DMA, and very much so as well with the DSA, of course, because also the DSA puts human rights lists as one of its core objectives. It has a lot of mention to fundamental rights and civil society organizations, etc., etc. So yes, there is strong opposition, but we do think things in certain spaces and in the European Union are going in the right direction, and this is something that we can continue to build on.
And can I also invite all the panelists to reflect on the second part of Yuri's question when it comes to how can the European Commission put this more at the forefront in terms of next policy objectives when there's so much concern about enforcement of the DSA and DMA? And Vittorio,
Yeah.
let's start with you.
Well, yeah, before coming to that, I'd like to just mention that my perception early last year, was that interoperability of social media was blocked, not too much because of law enforcement proper, let's say, concerns, but because of national security concerns and political concerns on basically to say, they say this bluntly and don't quote me, how are we gonna take down Russian propaganda if rather than just having to deal with Facebook, we have to deal with like 1,000 different systems. So because I mean, especially last year, this was the top concern. But I mean, coming to implementation, we have to create demand. So we have to show that there are people out there that want to build interoperable instant messaging applications or all the others, and are just waiting for the gatekeepers to open up the interfaces. And this is a task for the free software community. And well, we actually have them because in the end we have Matrix. I think most of us are also already using Matrix, and the people from Matrix, from Element, are actually very active in this discussion. So, but I mean, that's really what you have. I mean, we have to show that there are people waiting for these people and companies, because as we said, I mean, if it's important for digital rights activists to stand up, but there are parts of the European Parliament that maybe say, okay, it's the usual activists. And if businesses started to say, European businesses, we do this, we want this, then they start to listen more. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. And this is why companies like, all the European open source software industry is starting to become active, and we've been doing things around this. And technically, it's not so complex. I mean, there are, by the way, standardization efforts going on, starting at the IETF. And I mean, there's it's really more of a matter of convincing the gatekeepers not to do too much resistance, and we don't know how it will be. But from the Commission's viewpoint, the problem is that they feel this is hard because it's a new problem and they don't have the skills, I'd say, in the sense that they have people that are very competent at regulation and at antitrust, but they don't have technical experts, at least in the stuff, not enough and not of the right type in the stuff. So the problem is, how can we build something which is sort of a mixed effort between the Commission and the community, everybody in Europe that cares about this, so that we can maybe provide them with the technical and practical expertise on what they should be asking the gatekeepers to do. And then, of course, we'll see whether they listen.
Thank you. Ian, do you want to go next on this question? Jan, can we hear from you?
Yeah, sure. I think in a way people need to realize that when it comes to privacy is also a security matter. And I think in a way, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, misinformation and the like, would not be there if it wasn't for the recommendation engines, right? So again, it's tied to the fact, which is why, you look at someone, Facebook has been talking about how many people they have working on dealing with misinformation and the like. So basically you create a system that propagates misinformation, and then you hire a lot of people to deal with it. Now it's a lot easier if you look at the kind of how things worked in the old days. If you had a crazy person saying something silly somewhere on the internet, you wouldn't know because you would never see it. Now the algorithms now take that information and push it to the forefront. So we need to basically understand that, again, the algorithms are part of the problem. Distributed systems are better, I think, from a privacy perspective, also from the perspective of dealing with how the flow of information is going. Anyone that's playing with the new technologies. I mean, there's a lot of focus on the messaging apps now. I think in some ways the social network apps are even, I mean, more interesting in a way, because again, the algorithms deciding the content that you're seeing and the like are part of that equation to a greater extent. And I really think that, again, those algorithms are a very big part of the problem. So I think people have been thinking that, okay, we need to give up privacy for the sake of security. I would like to go in the other direction and saying our lack of privacy is a significant security problem, and we need to resolve that. And that's also why, I mean, I'm all for interoperability, just not if it's cementing the sharing of data about what we are and who we are. And I mean, that's where it becomes of a problem, right?
Thank you. We have one more question in the room, and I'd like the panelists, when they answer that question, to also build in their final remarks as we're coming close to the end of the session. And I hope our predictions judge did not forget to monitor Mastodon and Twitter, because we have 3 little awards to hand on. So please.
Thank you. You'll be really glad I don't have a question. I just have a comment. So if that's okay. So my name is Dujan from a small privacy watchdog organization based in Croatia. I just have a comment on the narrative of the promise of third-party recommendation systems and what it can bring. So even in this panel, I see that most of the line of thinking is connected to, you know, quality of the public debate and misinformation. But Francis Huygen testified that basically most of the things that we see as negative in social networks would just melt away if we dealt with the engagement-based ranking. So in a sense, this ranking system is behind, you know, massacres in Myanmar, the civil wars in Africa, teen eating disorders on Instagram. Basically, I would just suggest sort of painting a more broad picture of this promise of new recommendation systems and maybe framing it as well-being of the society and even the individual. And I would opt for this, especially in line of the growing body of scientific work that directly links this pandemic of mental health issues among the young with the use of social media. So in a sense, this would not just safeguard the public debate, it would also safeguard the well-being of society and individuals, and especially the young kids who have like increasing rates of mental disorders, which are continuing even today. So that's just a small comment.
Thank you for...
Question in the back, should we take that? Do you have a real question?
If it's quick, then we can take it.
Is it quick?
And in the meantime, I'd like the panel to reflect on one final thought they want to share with the audience or with the European Commission, if they do have recommendations for how to implement interoperability in the 2024 mandate. And one more thing that I also forgot, but let's hear the question first.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't broaden the scope too much, but we've talked a lot about like messaging apps and the fact that and praised the rise of our open standards and interoperability, and also many in the past have predicted the death of email, and yet nobody is using GPG, right? And so I was thinking like in terms of interoperability and also the platform, and also about like competition and the enforcement of privacy laws. What is your prediction about emails in the future of privacy laws and platforms?
Okay, I would, to be honest, I would go even more radical. I would say, like, how can we reimagine the whole architecture of infrastructure? Like maybe separating the infrastructure layer from the user interface layer from the data collection layer. And I think that offers a lot more opportunities in terms of really rethinking how platforms work. But I know Ian also wrote an article, if I'm not mistaken, myth busting what Frances Hogan said about interoperability. So maybe he can bring in that point very quickly. And then one final thought from our panelists.
Well, very specifically, and what Haugen said to the European Parliament was interpreted at one point as she was against interoperability. That I then talked more to the people who basically had planned her grand tour of Europe. And what they said was she was talking about the DSA very specifically and not about the DMA and its interoperability obligations. But bringing that back to Joris's question, I think absolutely there were concerns about in the EU Council about disinformation and what interoperable social media would do to attempts to reduce disinformation. I think all those concerns have good answers. I mean, I don't doubt that what Vittorio said was correct also. I spoke to one of the most senior people in the council at the time. The DMA was being finalized, and his concern was much more basic, and really I sort of slightly put my head in my hands afterwards. This was a minister who said, I can't imagine what interoperable social media looks like. And I mean, I tried to explain. I mean, what I should have, I found that baffling given, you know, Mastodon isn't only, 6 months old. Mastodon, even at the time, had 4 million user accounts. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward to me, but that has been one of the problems in having these conversations with politicians. They're not technical experts, that's fine. But their sort of vision of the world seems very constrained by what they're familiar with themselves, what tools they use. Clearly, they hadn't used Mastodon. And I think that's one of the positive things about the DMA messaging interoperability obligation. It will make a lot more people familiar with the idea of interoperability over time, I hope.
I'm getting very expansive signs that unfortunately we would need to wrap up the session here. I would like to ask the panelists, the remaining panelists, if they can still post their answers on Mastodon or Twitter so that we don't leave this discussion hanging in the air. And